Okay, so I confirm we're live now.
Okay. Ready for me to go?
Yes, that's fine.
Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the People Overview Committee. I'm Councillor Peggy Mullock, Chair of the committee. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting has been live streamed and recorded. Members of the public will be able to hear the audio of the meeting and view the papers shown on the screen. This meeting has been held using remote technology, and should any committee members experience technical difficulties during the meeting, they should immediately ring the support telephone number they have already been given. Everyone is requested to mute their microphones unless asked to speak. Please only use the chat function to indicate the desire to speak. Do not use it for anything else. As Chair, I will interpret the Council's existing standing orders in light of the requirements of remote participation, with advice from the monitoring officer prior to making a ruling. At the start of the meeting, I will ask members of the committee to confirm their presence and any disclosable pecuniary interests they have in any of the items on the agenda. I will ask everyone invited to speak during the meeting, including members of the committee and officers, to introduce themselves each time before they speak. We'll now do the roll call. Members are reminded to disclose any pecuniary interest in any matters to be discussed, which is not included in the register of interest, and leave the meeting prior to the matter being discussed. I have no interest to declare. Kevin Turley, I think, has given his apologies. Royal Croft. Sorry. Royal Croft.
Yes, Royal Croft. No interest to declare.
Thank you. Ruth Horton.
Yes, here, Chair, and no interest to declare.
Christian Lee.
Yes, I'm here, Chair, and I've got no interest to declare.
Matt Lee. Matt Lee. Or perhaps he'll join us later. Elliot Lynch.
Yes, I'm here, Chair, and no pecuniary interest to declare.
Cecilia Motley.
Chair, Councillor Motley has given her apologies to this meeting.
OK. Kevin Pardy.
Here and nothing to declare.
And Carol Morgan. Carol Morgan. Again, perhaps she'll join later. And we have apologies from Sean Lyons. I'll now turn to items on the agenda. Can the committee officer confirm if there are any apologies or substitutions?
I'm not aware of any other apologies, Chair, or substitutions.
I move that the minutes of the People Overview Committee meeting held on the 30th of September 2020, as circulated with the agenda papers, be signed as a correct record. Could I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that, Councillor Allcroft.
Thank you. I will now accept these minutes as a true record unless anyone else indicates differently. I can't see anything on my screen. OK. Item 4 is public question time. There are none
submitted. No.
And member question time.
There are none.
Right. So item 6 is the Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership. And while we're looking at this, in previous years, the committee has considered an annual report from what was the Children's Safeguarding Board. This was a statutory requirement of the Safeguarding Board. This requirement ended in 2018. Since then, the Safeguarding Board has been merged into a wider safeguarding partnership that covers the children's safeguarding, adult safeguarding and community safety. This is called the Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership. Rather than consider annual reports for each strain of the partnership work, officers have suggested to overview and scrutiny that it would perhaps be more effective to consider these strands of the partnership work together. This will allow the committee to consider more fully issues that transcend these boundaries, for example, child criminal exploitation, as in county lines, apologies. Could the officers introduce themselves and present this item, please?
Certainly, Chair. Thank you. My name is Sarah Hollins Headland. I'm the Statutory Safeguarding Business Partner for the Council, and I manage the business unit that supports this partnership, and I'll be leading the presentation, but I'm also joined by our independent chair, who will also be chipping into the discussion as we go through the afternoon. So I'll hand over to Ivan to introduce himself.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Hello, Chair. Hello, colleagues. My name is Ivan Powell, for those who I've not previously met, and as Sarah has said, I'm the independent chair of Shropshire's Safeguarding Community Partnership.
Okay, so if we could have the first slide then, Amanda, please. As was explained by the chair, we had 3 separate and distinct partnerships in Shropshire. So the purpose of this report is to kind of explain to this committee where we are now at with our combined governance structure for Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership. So people will probably, I'm sure, be aware we used to have a Community Safety Partnership, a Shropshire Children's Safeguarding Board, and a Keeping Adults Safe in Shropshire Board. So what we've done in Shropshire is something that I believe is a really brave, forward-thinking step to take by creating a single governance structure that brings all of these strands together. Now, I'm going to use this presentation to pull out the things that you will see in front of you in the full report, which I thought might be a little bit more interesting for you rather than me regurgitating what I'm sure you've already read. So if we can have the next slide, Amanda. This is the collective vision, and if you imagine the previous structure, we would have had 3 visions and they would have all had a slightly different slant. But what we've now been able to do with our single governance structure is to create one vision that's articulated here for you. The partnership is committed to increasing the safety and resilience of people in Shropshire, including children and adults with care and support needs, and their communities, in order to reduce harm caused by abuse, neglect or other crime. The chair's already outlined it in her introduction. It's a really, really important thing that we're doing to try and reduce us looking at these issues separately, because some of these themes are very cross-cutting, and that will become quite obvious when I talk through the structure, which I'll do in the next slide. But I just wanted to pick out on one word in particular, and that's the word of resilience in our community, and why I think that's so important. There are obviously times when children, adults, families who live in Shropshire need the support of our services. But obviously one of the things that we're really interested in from a council point of view is making sure that people have the confidence, the knowledge, the ability to where they can protect themselves, because prevention is a really, really important part of this work. What we're really keen to do is prevent these situations happening before harm occurs, rather than constantly having to respond to it. So I thought it might be worth kind of picking out that word in particular, and you may want to come back to that as we enter into the discussion aspect a bit later on. So we'll move on to the structure, and you can see what that looks like. Everything at the moment now seems to be revolving around this triangle, and you'll see it repeated a number of times in various documents. But I'm just going to explain the SSCP triangle at the top of this. So this is where we have our main partners that have statutory and responsible authority responsibilities for these areas of work. So it's essentially that top group, I always end up calling it the top table, that takes on the role of the Safeguarding Children's Partnership, the Safeguarding Adult Board and the Community Safety Partnership. And then that structure underneath is set up to help deliver on the strategic plan, which you've got in detail in the report, and our strategic priorities. The next bit really to highlight in this structure are the dark blue boxes that sit in the bottom half of the triangle. So I want to say a little bit more about these, because you'll have a lot more detail in the report, and I'm sure you'll have questions when we get into the discussion. But what you can see in front of you is the fact that our structure has been very much based around the strategic priorities that we've set for the partnership over the next 3 years. Now, we did that in a development day in February at the beginning of the year. Representatives of all the 3 partnerships and boards that we've referred to were all part of that discussion. And through a period of a hard day's work, actually, we identified 7 strategic priorities. Now, if I just start from the 3, that's the kind of bottom row of those dark blue boxes, we've got 3 joint priorities. And again, this really feeds into why we've made the decisions to do what we've done. And we've made them joint priorities because they run across the whole system. So exploitation is a joint priority. Transitional safeguarding is a joint priority, and this is where children move from adults, being supported by children's social care, moving to being adults, but often sometimes fall through the net because they don't necessarily have care and support needs, but may still be experiencing abuse and exploitation. So we wanted that as a specific work stream. And then domestic abuse, which is also a joint priority. So the reason that we say those 3 things are joint is because they affect children, they affect adults with care and support needs, and they affect our community in its widest sense. The next 2 above are our community safety priorities specifically. So we've got preventing offending. And that preventing offending strand also includes looking at antisocial behaviour and hate crime. Again, something that, in fairness, you could look at all of these and say they are all ought to be joint, but I guess we have to carve them up in some way. But preventing offending does very much have some cross-cutting themes for us, as does the next community safety priority, which is drug and alcohol misuse. So we are required to have in our strategy our approach to drug and alcohol misuse and to preventing offending and preventing reoffending. And then the last 2, but certainly not the least, are the single priorities for adults and children. And we have a priority of self-neglect for adults, and we have a priority of neglect for children. And in my presentation, what I'll do towards the end of the presentation is just share a couple of case studies with you that help to explain why these things are priorities, because we are currently experiencing these issues in Shropshire. I won't say too much more about that triangle other than to say the light blue boxes that are above our joint case review, our learning and development and assurance and performance group is where we bring together all of the things that we have to do on top of our strategic priorities. So, for instance, we have statutory responsibilities for safeguarding adults, for safeguarding children, certain responsibilities around community safety, and case reviews, making sure that we learn from things that go wrong in the county, and all of those groups make sure that we pick up that work. I'm very conscious that I'm giving you lots of information, but I promise I'll breathe shortly and then you'll be able to ask me any questions. So I'll have the next slide, please, Amanda. So this is the business unit. I won't talk too much about this. This is the group of staff that support the business unit. And as usual, Ivan's looking very smart there, immaculately dressed independent chair. And we're the team that make sure that the partnership is up and running. OK.
Yeah.
OK, so I just wanted really to introduce you to a couple of phrases that you hear quite a lot in relation to the partnership and in relation to these particular areas of work. And the first one is safeguarding is everyone's business. And again, I'd welcome your thoughts as elected members on what this means for you as elected members. But it's a statement and a saying that, if we're not very careful, can end up being quite meaningless. But what we really mean by it is that we want people to take responsibility for it. We want people to help prevent harm occurring. We want people to see that it's their business to respond and support people who are experiencing abuse or experiencing crime. So I guess what it doesn't mean is Safeguarding is everybody's business doesn't mean phone the local authority and tell them about it and get somebody else to deal with it. What we want to really push as a strong message in Shropshire is that we want everybody to see it as their responsibility to do something about this whole area that we see in front of us. That is very, very complicated. It's tough work, and people end up in very, very horrible situations because of it. But if we can prevent that, then that is much, much better for our community. So the second phrase then is the system, and it follows on from the point that I've made. So you'll often hear people talking about the system. Has the system worked? Has the system failed? And I just wanted to use this wall as a way of illustrating this point. And I've just posed the question there, is it a thing? And I would suggest it is not a thing, actually, because if the system were this wall, people could sit on the wall, they could jump over the wall and hide behind it, they could sit in front of it and lean against it and use it to prop them up. But what I would like to suggest is that each of these bricks are every one of us. And actually the system is made up of individual people, which when you expand that, that can be then expanded into communities, which might be a smaller set of bricks, or teams that work in professional settings. And I think what's really important is that we see ourselves as the system, so that we don't make the system something that we push away and we lose responsibility for. I guess what I'm saying is we are it. We are the partnership. We are the safeguarding system, and it's us as individuals and then collectively that we can make a real difference to people's lives. So I'd really welcome your views on that. I don't know whether that's a bit controversial. So next slide then, Amanda. So we've been working together in this way now for nearly a year already, and I really can't believe that the time has flown so quickly. So the first thing just to make you aware of is that when I talked through that bit of the triangle earlier on, probably about half of that full governance structure is up and running. We have been delayed because of the COVID pandemic. It has had a major impact on our work in the partnership. But what we have done, whilst we haven't been able to be fully up and running as a full governance structure, is set up various COVID partnership meetings to make sure that we are on top of what's happening in the county. So we have regular fortnightly COVID partnership meetings at the moment. We have monthly data set meetings which actually look at what's happening as a result of COVID in our county, and keeping an eye on certain things like domestic abuse, child protection plans, adult safeguarding referrals, etc. And some of the things on this screen are just the things that we've developed. So we did a poster campaign around domestic abuse. That was a particular concern when lockdown started. We don't reflect anywhere near the national reported figure of a 25% increase in domestic abuse. In fact, our reported domestic abuse in Shropshire is way lower than that. I think it's around 6%. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be concerned, because it may be that some of that is more hidden, and that's what we're worried about. We've produced online training sessions for people to access, recognising they weren't able to go into face-to-face sessions, guidance for volunteers, and we are just in the process of agreeing a set of expected standards for all of our professional agencies that work within the partnership. And the reason that we're doing that is because at the start of lockdown, we became quite concerned that various parts of our system were changing the way they worked because of COVID. So, for instance, some groups of staff completely stopped seeing people in their own homes. And that, from a safeguarding point of view, is a real problem for us. So what we're trying to do is say to organisations, this is what we want you to do as a minimum when it comes to the safeguarding of our community and preventing crime and responding to crime, so people are as safe as possible. Off the back of that is a staffing risk assessment, which we're asking people to complete if they need to go away from those expected standards. So we're hoping to generate far more joined up discussions about making organisations making changes to their staffing arrangements. So I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, please ask me questions later on. Okay, Amanda. So I just thought it would be helpful for you to understand some of the situations. I've got 3 cases to talk through briefly for you. And this is a situation under the heading of adult safeguarding, and it is under the heading, it would come under the heading of our priority of self-neglect. And this is a gentleman who lived in the north of the county. He came to our attention, I think, through the police, if my memory serves me correctly, and he was living in an incredibly dangerous environment. He couldn't stand up in his house. The reason that you've got that paper pile as an image next to these bullet points is because effectively he had so many piles of paper and wood in his house, it was actually keeping the ceiling up and stopping the roof from falling in. He had to negotiate his way through the house, through the tunnels between these papers. He had no electricity. He would only see people at night. So the staff that were involved, and this was most definitely a multi-agency piece of work, but also an interdisciplinary piece of work, meant that actually it was far too dangerous for us even to send our own staff in. But what we had to do was work very flexibly with him, and we had staff who went out to see him at 9 o'clock at night. So they had to change their working hours in order to start to work with him and engage with him and get him to accept help. He is a good news story. He is now in a housing environment that is clean and clear of and not dangerous in the way that he was living in it before. But it took, I would say, we've been working with this gentleman for a good couple of years. So these things take a long time. Hence, we're seeing more and more of these cases around self-neglect, hoarding in particular, and that's one of the reasons why it's a priority for adult safeguarding. Okay, so the photographs that you can see in front of you, this is really stories about children, child protection and child neglect in Shropshire, which has been a priority in Shropshire for quite a number of years now, and we remain really concerned about it. So the images that you can see are not the images that the children were living in, but the children, and it's not just one family we're talking about, children are living in Shropshire in situations similar to this. And one of the things that we have seen, particularly over recent months, and our concern is there's a very strong link to the impact of the COVID pandemic, but we've seen far more high-risk situations come into children's services and far more children subject to police protection orders, which means urgent action is required. The police have the power to remove the children from the environments that they're living in. And this is a major concern for us and something that we're working really hard on as a partnership, but also because of our more recent concerns because of the impact of COVID, and I'm sure Karen will want to chip in at a later point on this part of the discussion. The partnership are commissioning an independent person to come in and help us look at what's happening in Shropshire, to see what we can learn, see whether or not we could have done anything at any point, any sooner to try and make a difference to these children's lives. But what we do know, we think, with a lot of these children is they weren't known to us previously. So this is a very unusual situation for us to be in. Hence, you know, it's one of the reasons why it's right that we have child neglect as one of our priorities. And then the last slide from me. This is a very recent story. One of the responsibilities of the Community Safety Partnership is to arrange to undertake antisocial behaviour case reviews under certain circumstances. Those circumstances are when antisocial behaviour is being experienced for more than 6 occasions in 6 months, but also there's recent antisocial behaviour activity. And we had one of these such requests come in, and I chaired the meeting that this review was about. And what you can see here is a little bit about the person's experience of living with antisocial behaviour. She couldn't use her back garden. She was constantly subject to verbal abuse. They had to put up in the house with regular screaming and shouting. They were regularly, as a couple, told by the neighbour that she was going to burn the house down. Now, this was a great concern to them because they were connected. So obviously that means there's quite an increase in risk there. The people that live there feel nervous and anxious about how they feel in their own home. Obviously, none of us would want that for anybody. And it affected them so much that this person's husband even said he would have to leave if it didn't change, because he just couldn't cope with the constant allegations being made about him and the sleepless nights they were getting. Now, I'm sure you can read between the lines here. There's certainly more going on than meets the eye. The person that lived next door was in receipt of support from both the local authority and the Mental Health Partnership Trust. But the role of the Antisocial Behaviour Case Review in this particular situation was to have a look at whether there was enough being done to support the person experiencing the antisocial behaviour. And of course, in this situation, because we know this person has support needs of their own, making sure the support package is around them to minimise the impact it has on their neighbours. So there are a group of professionals now working to support both the victim and the person who could very well be perpetrating that antisocial behaviour if they become unwell. So really, from a presentation point of view, that's it from me. But I'm more than happy to answer any questions, as I know Ivan would be, and take any comments about some of the earlier points that I was making, or any questions about the report at all.
Can't see.
Hello, Chair. May I speak,
hands
please?
at this, so yes.
Thank you, Chair. I did add the request onto the comment section.
Oh, sorry, I haven't got that.
Not a problem.
My fault.
Hello, Sarah. It's
Hello.
thank you very much for the report. I can clearly see fantastic work. Just a question, and I think you sort of raised it as well as a point for question. You mentioned risk assessments, that if standards can't be confirmed throughout the pandemic, what is actioned post-risk assessment?
So at the moment, because this is a new part of our system, we're still in the process of negotiating the wording with our partners about the expected minimum standards, which, to be honest, are things that we would expect to happen anyway, whether we were in a pandemic or not. Then if people can't sign up to that and need to change their staffing arrangements, we would then expect people to submit a staffing risk assessment to us for us to have a robust discussion with that particular organisation about whether they could do things differently, or how they were actually going to manage the risk differently so that the person wasn't negatively impacted. Now, we've only had one staffing risk assessment in so far. That was from the fire service, and it's very much about a historic arrangement that they've had in place since lockdown. So we are yet to review that one because it is already sort of a new practice that they've had established for some months. But my expectation would be that there is discussion from amongst the partnership, because part of the point of this partnership is that that everybody holds each other to account and puts in those appropriate challenges to make sure that we're keeping people as safe as possible. So as soon as we would get one of those risk assessments, we would make sure it was discussed at a meeting, and then there'd be some challenge, and we would reach, hopefully, a partnership agreement on the way forward. That would be the aim.
Thank you, Sarah. That certainly answered my question.
Ruth, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah, for a very interesting presentation. Could I just go back to the first slide with the triangle? I'm just interested in the the adult bit around self-neglect for adults.
Yeah.
Where would you explore and cover the abuse by others to adults, to vulnerable adults, for example, in a care setting or by a paid carer?
That comes as part and parcel of what, you know, not wanting to minimise that work at all. Councillor, it's our business as usual safeguarding work. So all of that is monitored through our assurance and performance group, our learning and development group. In our assurance and performance group, we're currently building our data sets for all of these areas of work. And not only will we have data sets and profiles around our strategic priority areas, we will also have core data sets around our business as usual adult safeguarding work, for instance. So we will collect lots of information about the number of safeguarding contacts that have come in, how many of those contacts turn into concerns, how many of those concerns then turn into inquiries. And particularly for care settings, one of the things that we will be able to report on is the quality of the inquiries that are done on the council's behalf, because the arrangements are very different in terms of adults and children's, and I'm sure you'll remember that from your previous role. So a lot of it is actually in those top 3 light blue groups, and also will be covered by annual reports. So although we started off by saying this is a replacement for receiving an annual report, that's because by the time we ever get an annual report to scrutiny, it's so out of date, it's very hard to make it meaningful for you. But a lot of our activity around our day-to-day adult safeguarding practice will be covered in the annual reports, and going forwards, when we write in annual reports about this new combined structure, it will absolutely feature as part and parcel of that, because we still have priorities around, you know, involving the person, making safeguarding personal, and it'll be part and parcel of everything we do.
Good, thank you very much.
Councillor Pardy, did you want to speak?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. I'm just looking at the domestic abuse and knowing when we're successful, as it says. Yeah. Since 2013, Shropshire Council have withdrawn quite a bit of financial support for domestic abuse. How much are we investing in this financially?
That's a question that I can't answer at this point in time. It's certainly information I can go away and get the answer to, if that's helpful. I know we are investing money. I know that there is additional investment, particularly through this COVID period as well. And we are in the process of looking at our domestic abuse contract, which is currently with Shropshire Domestic Abuse Services. Now that contract's got another year to run, but obviously one of the things that will be being done through that domestic abuse group is having a look at what the data is telling us about what's happening in terms of domestic abuse in Shropshire, and having a clear view about where we want that contract to focus its work. I think one of the things that's really important to identify as well is the work that we need to do in relation to working with people who are perpetrators of domestic abuse. There has always been a really historic focus on victims. Now, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be a focus on victims, but really in order to tackle this, we absolutely have to start working with perpetrators to minimise their behaviour, to stop it, to disrupt it, to prevent them from harming others. Often there can be quite a cycle of abuse for people who are experiencing it, and people who are abusers can move from one relationship to another. So it's really important in our review of the money that we do have to invest, that we take that into consideration with our new contract.
Thank you very much.
I can't see any more questions at the moment, so I think it's no. Over to you, Ivan.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Christian, I've just spotted you. You just come up on my screen. Did you want a question before we go forward?
Yes, I'd just like to know, how has the partnership with its new arrangement resulted in better intelligence and data sharing?
I think that's a really good question, and the answer is we're still building that. Certainly the work that I'm doing with colleagues in my team on developing that data set they are shaping up really, really well. What we have as a requirement for all of our strategic priority groups is not only they develop a data set to help identify how well we're performing in these particular areas and whether we're making a difference, but so that we can actually develop a community profile around these particular issues, so we understand who's impacted, where they're impacted, are there geographical hotspots, for instance, around domestic abuse, and should we have a focus of services in that area. So it's still very much work in progress, but we are optimistic that we're probably only a couple of months away from a few very robust data sets being developed to help us understand what's happening. And obviously what's important is that we get that from a range of partners and don't just fall back on the local authority data that we know we've got a lot of good, rich data, but actually to really understand the problem in Shropshire, we need to understand what other organisations' experience of it are as well. So we're trying to make sure the data sets that we build are multi-agency.
Thank you.
But still work in progress.
Okay, I can't see anybody else on my screen, so this time over to you, Ivan.
Okay, thank you. I'll make a few points. I won't go back over obviously what Sarah has said. I'll just pick up a couple of things to build on comments from colleagues. So just on the last point about data, performance and intelligence, I think it's just important to remind everybody that when Sarah's talking about developing a data set, she's not talking about starting from ground zero. What she's actually describing is building on what we already have and using that to join things up. So by way of example, yesterday, Sarah and I were on a call with somebody from West Mercia Police to talk about the approach to missing children and adults, and where in certain circumstances, the intelligence information may indicate there is an opportunity to issue what's called a child abduction warning notice to somebody who is encouraging young people to come to their house. Similarly, another conversation we've been having with regard to the criminal exploitation of children is where we can use some of those civil order approaches for what's called disruption activity. So I wouldn't want members to think that we're absolutely starting from scratch. That's not the case, but we're building on and joining up. So that would be my first point. Another point I would make, councillor, one of the councillors asked about the adult safeguarding work. Again, building on what we're already doing there. Regionally, there's been a piece of work conducted by Local Government Association and Directors of Adult Services to identify what a good practice minimum set of performance information we would need to deliver adult safeguarding robustly and in compliance with the Care Act. So we engage with that piece of work, obviously for Shropshire, and pleased to report that we are at least as compliant as that piece of work and report requires, but in actual fact we're over and above what is expected. Just a little bit about the children's element in particular. I won't rehearse the journey, but I'm sure members will remember that all of the work around children's revision started from the Alan Wood review, ultimately ended up in primary legislation and Working Together 2018. We recently, as a partnership, have contributed to a review of our current arrangements, which is being coordinated on the part of central government by Sir Alan Wood. He is looking at how the revised arrangements have been embedded across the country, and so we've engaged with that. We will see what comes out of that. It might be of interest for members to know that I actively engage nationally with my colleagues. Not all areas have gone down this particular approach. I work in two other areas. One has followed this approach exactly, and the priorities are exactly the same. Another area haven't gone down this approach, have chosen to stay in three discrete areas. And in my view, and the view of my children's colleague who performs that function in that particular area. There are some elements where we are struggling to get some join up and some traction, and the one area that I would pick out here is that area of transitional safeguarding that Sarah has explained. So my personal view is this is ambitious, as Sarah has said, but it is the right thing to do. I just one last little thing, if I might. Sarah spoke about the wall and the role of all of us as individuals. Just some thoughts, if I may, about the role of elected members. Of course, you are our eyes and our ears in the community, absolutely. But importantly, you can have dialogue with our communities. And I'm not going to make light of this, but it may just make you smile a little bit. In my role as local policing commander before I retired, one of the things that was the bane of my life was complaints about speeding traffic. And I'm absolutely aware one of the things that was the bane of local councillors' life was potholes in the road. And I used to use a particular slide that had a pothole on one side and a 30-mile-an-hour along the limit, and then flippantly suggest that if the council didn't fill in the potholes, then the traffic wouldn't be able to speed through that particular location. Now that of course is a silly example, but it is important to make the point about joining up our forces and understanding each other's priorities so that we can engage with our communities in a meaningful way. And I will use this example. When I suspect that when people look out of their window, they see groups of young people hanging about, which for some people makes them feel unsafe, and for some people they perceive that to be antisocial behavior. And they probably see a bit of graffiti or criminal damage, and they probably see some litter about on the streets. What they won't overtly see, looking out of their window, is children who are being criminally exploited in matters such as county lines. They won't overtly see criminal gangs dealing drugs across Shropshire. And so my point is, one of your roles as community leaders might well be to engage in that debate with our local community members and get them to understand that. And of course, to get them to understand that domestic abuse is an important priority for Shropshire. And then lastly, in terms of your role as key influencers, I guess, one of the things that we have to do when we put together our strategic plan is to have due regard to the police and crime plan of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Now, of course, there is a police and crime panel, and so there is opportunity there for you as members to be influencers of the content of that police and crime plan. So I'll pause there for questions or observations.
Okay, I've got one for you to start off. When this committee last looked at child criminal exploitation, it was tackled both by the Children's Safeguarding Board and the Community Safety Partnership. How has bringing these partnerships together strengthened the work in this area? Okay,
so I'll go from the bottom up, if I might, Chair. So we have a dedicated multi-agency group of the right partners, of the right level of seniority, who sit specifically to explore all age criminal exploitation, which does include criminal exploitation of children and child sexual exploitation. So there is a specific group that pick up that. And the subtleties around that, for example, certain children who go missing are at risk of child sexual exploitation. So we are able, through that group, to understand those children who might be at risk, to do something to work with them to prevent them from going missing, and indeed to understand what are called the pull factors. What are the pull factors that are drawing children away from where they are safe into these unsafe environments? In terms of the community safety element, because I chair the tripartite relationship, I have the statutory responsibility for a community safety partnership chair. And by virtue of that role, I attend the West Mercia Police Level Crime Reduction Board, And at that crime reduction board, there are discussions about what the police and partners are doing to tackle serious and organised crime in particular. And then that rolls down to the local Shropshire level, where there is again a multi-agency partnership, rather a long title, Serious and Organised Crime Joint Action Group, chaired by Superintendent Lansdale from the police, but again, representatives from across all of the agencies and the voluntary and community sector to understand where our vulnerable points are in our communities, who our vulnerable victims are, and who our people who are posing the risk. So there is a joined up structure. I personally don't think anything has been lost. We certainly have Jeanette Hill come to our fortnightly, what we have called COVID data set and partnership discussions. In actual fact, we're now coming out of calling them COVID because they are very much our business as usual. But Jeanette talks to us in great detail about the tracker process that they use to understand children who are at different levels of risk of harm and what is being done to support them. So I hope that's a reassuring answer.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Councillor Horton, you got a question?
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Ivan. My question is for both you and Sarah, and it's around the LGO report that I read this morning, as I know other panel members have read too, about how some young people were issued with a tent, for example, as living accommodation once they left services. That was one of the examples. How would this partnership learn from that report and others that I'm sure there will be in the future? And how will this scrutiny panel be assured that it won't or can't happen in Shropshire?
Okay, so there's a good question. Thank you, Councillor. And interestingly, somebody sent me that report to read this morning. All I've had a chance to do is have a quick look at the title of the report, so you're ahead of me. But just to pick up on the broader question, actually, if I may, about learning. So I as part of my contract, I'm required to be an active member of both the adults and children's national safeguarding structures. So what that does is it enables me to be linked into other people like myself who are working nationally, but importantly into local government association, into different government departments, including social care and education. So that is the way that we are cited on national policy locally. We should also bear in mind that Karen Bradshaw, as the Director of Children's Services, is a member of the Association of Directors of Children's Services, and that Tanya Miles is a member of the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services. There are three links into national opportunities to learn and to keep pace with policy revision and refinement. And that's been really important through the coronavirus pandemic, because no sooner has a piece of guidance been issued, it seems to have been amended. We learn locally from our statutory learning reviews that Sarah has said, and we also learn locally by engaging with our regional partners about the learning they are doing. Specifically during coronavirus, and specifically for rough sleeping and housing and homelessness, I'm sure you will be cited on the work that Laura Fisher has been involved with, which includes a hotel in Shropshire, which has attracted some national media attention. So the housing duty is met by the local authority, but Laura and a range of partners have been working together to recognise that there is opportunities to support people who are in vulnerable positions who may not meet a statutory threshold. So could it happen? Theoretically, it could. Would the local safeguarding response be rapid? I think it probably would. I don't think we can never say never, because it's been highlighted in a national report, and we shouldn't be so naive as to ignore that. And what we do with those kinds of things is we take the opportunity to use it as a mirror to reflect on our local system Another example would have been, or is, the Amnesty International report, which is actually focused on central government, but criticises central government for some of their policies on care homes during the pandemic. So we're doing some work locally to use that to reflect on how does that look in Shropshire.
Can I add to that as well, just in response to Councillor Horton? One of the items on our next executive group is actually one of those, it's homelessness and safeguarding. So one of the things that we've done is taken on board in Shropshire that rough sleeper deaths will be considered in terms of whether they could be joint case reviews. So they are built into that joint case review process. They might not necessarily end up as a joint case review, but I know certainly one of them is at the moment. And then the other thing is that what I'll do is I'll ask Laura to make sure that she includes the report you've just referenced in that presentation that she's going to do to executive, because that will generate a cross-system discussion across all ages around homelessness. So I'll make sure that that's considered as part of that work.
Thank you very much. That's good.
Oh, I haven't got any more. After reading your report, one of my questions was going to be, how are you going to bring about an increase in public awareness of child neglect, which with this lockdown has become obvious, you know, it's a problem?
Yes, I can answer that. It's a high priority in our neglect group's business plan. One of the things that we're doing is we are planning a public awareness campaign. Karen will want to chip in on this, I'm sure, because there's also something that Children's Social Care are doing. But in terms of what's coming out of the neglect group, one of the things that we want to do is make sure that professionals understand when to recognise neglect and respond accordingly, that parents know what neglect is at every level so that they don't do it, and that children understand what's neglectful so they can recognise it if it's happening to themselves, their friends or the members of their family. So it's on our business plan, and it's a high priority to have it achieved by the end of next financial year, to produce a series of posters that will target those three groups, and we will work with those three groups to make sure that the language we use will actually hit home, because what we don't want to do is we don't want as a group of professionals to start using different terminology and still people are none the wiser. What we want to do is co-produce the messages on those series of posters that will actually talk to the groups that we want to understand it. One of the things that's been happening through the neglect group, there's been some case tracking work being done with 4 families. And it's a really long piece of work. It's actually going to span 2 years, but I think they're about a year into it. Now, there's already learning coming out of working with those families. And one of the things that we are finding out is that families think neglect is just the black and white photograph that you see on the NSPCC advert that comes on the telly. And actually, it's not that lower level, not engaging with your child, not getting them to their health appointments, not sending them to school. You know, it's very, very multi-layered. And what we want people to understand is it starts with really low-level stuff that people wouldn't necessarily want to jump in and call neglect. But we want people to recognise that that's start of the wrong direction. The other thing that's come out of that learning, which we are using very proactively in our learning and development sessions that we're in the process of putting together, is the fact that professionals are very nervous about having those difficult discussions with children and families. That goes across everybody in all of these areas of work, if I'm honest, but it's been highlighted as a particular issue here. So what we're doing is working hard to make sure that people understand what their responsibilities are for being open and transparent with those children, those families, so that the families actually understand what's required of them to make things better. Because if our professionals are too scared to have those discussions, we're going to end up in these really, really high risk situations that we're currently seeing. It's not the sole answer, of course it's not, but it's part and parcel of a whole package that we need to put around this particular issue.
Thank you.
Chair, would you like me to come in and just add a little bit of context
Yes,
from children's social care and the council's perspective? I think we're responding immediately to in three significant ways. We will be getting some messages out through the Step Up Shropshire campaign, which people have seen over the COVID period, and that Step Up Shropshire, keep our communities, children's families safe. So there will be some messages around there and what to do in terms of should the community identify children who may be at risk. Of course, it does take a community to raise a child and to keep a child safe. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we did do earlier in the week at one of our senior managers meeting was to say what role can we all play in this and reinvigorate that sort of a contribution that other council services can make. So for example, you know, bin men will regularly go down a house's drive. Normally if the house is in a state inside, the garden is in a state outside. And what other services, housing and you know, can identify and start to pick up some of these signs that severe neglect is in place. And then thirdly, I think there is a bit of a call out really to you as elected members, and we will be bringing that, I think, to the fore. You know your communities, you know your constituents, you know where some of the risk is. So you are our eyes and ears out there. And so we'd welcome you if you have any concerns about any children or families in your area, that you bring them to our attention. Even if they come to nothing, we'd rather look at situations to see if there is anything that needs to be done or not. And if there isn't, we'll just let families carry on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Karen. No, can't say any more, so you're stuck with me, I'm afraid. How do you work with neighbouring local authorities to tackle issues such as criminal and sexual exploitation?
Can I start and pick that one up, Chair? Is that okay?
Yes, please.
So firstly, the obvious one is what I've mentioned already, and that is that the Crime Reduction Board sits at the West Mercia Police level. So in terms of combating county lines, criminal exploitation and those linked issues, there is opportunity there to have joint discussions with councils and other partners who work across the Herefordshire, Worcestershire, Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin footprint. That's the first point. The second point is that the West Midlands multi-agency safeguarding arrangements for independent chairs and business managers link into something that is called the Violence Reduction Unit. That is a multi-agency unit that sits in the West Midlands region, but again sits to tackle organised and serious violent crime across the broader West Midlands footprint. And police colleagues, of course, link in as part of the National Crime Agency strategy. In fact, we've been supported last year, I think, or the year before, by visits to our local area from the National Crime Agency, and also invited by the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, the Home Office Violence and Vulnerability Unit, who conducted something called a strategic framework review. So there are a range of ways in which we do that. I'm not so naive as to suggest it's absolutely perfect, but what I would say, it does sit in an organised and a structured way, set meetings with set regularity and actions that are monitored.
And if I can add to that, just not losing sight of the operational group that Ivan talked about before, the serious and organised crime group, that deals very much with the hotspots, the areas that we're concerned with, and there will inevitably be links across boundaries. So for instance, with gangs coming in from Liverpool up in Oswestry, something like that. So any of the practicalities around that are dealt with through that operational group, and information is very proactively shared between police authorities.
Okay. Nobody putting the hand up or wanting to speak? No questions? No?
Chair, could I just make one quick point?
Who's that?
Oh, it's Ivan, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Darnie, yes.
I just I hope this is reassuring. Just an example of the level of granularity that sits beneath this. So as I indicated yesterday, we had a conversation with police around children who go missing, potentially being vulnerable to exploitation. So two things. The person that we had that meeting with has fired me across, literally as we've been meeting, all of the data with regard to that. But of course, you will know that in Shropshire, we have a significant number of children who are placed in Shropshire by other local authorities. One of the duties on all local authorities is to conduct return home interviews for children for whom they are the corporate parent, so that any intelligence about what's gone on while they've been missing, where they may have been vulnerable, there may have been risk posed to them. We previously have struggled to get some of those return home interviews conducted by local authorities who have placed into Shropshire. Now, what we've had confirmation of now is there is now an automated system from the police missing person system, which is called Compact, and that automatically sends an email to every single placing local authority to say there has been a missing episode for one of your children. You may wish to engage with the placement. You may wish to review that child's care plan. So hopefully a reassuring example of the depth and the level of detail that we actually are able to go to.
That is reassuring. Thank you. What have I got on here? Have the new arrangements then, you think, resulted in more efficient working? Example, smaller administrative burden, faster decision making?
I'm quite happy to chip in with that first. Karen and Ivan may want to join in. I think the answer is yes, and I think that's further. And it's not very often we talk about there being a positive as a result of the COVID pandemic, but certainly it's been helped by our new virtual way of working. And from a partnership perspective, we've enabled some of our more distant key partners to be able to engage with discussions they weren't previously involved in. So, for instance, the probation service are a really good example of that, the National Probation Service, who were based down in Worcester, and who had really kind of pulled out of some of the adults and children safeguarding arrangements, but stayed involved with community safety. Well, now, partly because of the way that we're working, they are back in touch with that whole agenda, and they can't move away from it because it's there, it's part and parcel of their work. And because we're working like this, and because they will only have to attend one meeting that covers 3 areas instead of 3 meetings that covers 3 separate areas, I've no doubt that we've improved efficiency. We're making a positive contribution to the climate change agenda, I've no doubt, through COVID, and I would like to see us keeping this as a substantial part of the way forward, because I do believe it's making a difference. The comments I've had from my team as well, who have been involved with the various versions, previous iterations of the partnerships, is that actually we've had very, very good, not always, but very, very good attendance and contribution and cross-partner discussion across these issues, which I think we're starting to see the benefit of that, I think. But Ivan and Karen might want to chip into that.
Chair, perhaps if I could just add, I think certainly when we designed the way that this partnership was going to operate, it really was around stripping out any replication, duplication. And what we all know is that by working together in a much more joined up way, we can be much more focused, much more dynamic, and use our scarce resources far more effectively. And I think, you know, we've done that in identifying the priorities and focusing on those priorities together, rather than all going off in different directions is an absolute positive. I think actually it's still reasonably early days yet as well. Yeah. You know, so this, you know, the whole system hasn't embedded in yet. So there is still some little, you know, teething issues. But absolutely, it is the right way to go. And you know, I'm pleased that Ivan commented that 2 out of his 3 local authority areas that he works with have gone down this route.
Yeah. Elliot, I believe you have a question.
Thank you, Chair, but I believe Christian is first, followed by Ruth.
Dave.
Okay, then Elliot, I'll step in. Could someone say how the partnership strengthened work with families where there's cross-generational issues?
I think, as Karen said, some of this is early days, but one of the things that we have seen happen, for instance, through our COVID data meeting, which happens on a monthly basis, is we're bringing together adult social care and children's social care and the police in the same room. So, for instance, just by doing that, you're enabling people to develop relationships, understand who to go if there's an issue. I can certainly think of occasions when there's been a need to talk to children's social care because there's been an issue in relation to the treatment of a grandparent, for instance. But one of the things that I think we are able to better achieve here is that speedier communication about how to resolve those things. And because people know who people are in the system to go to, that really does make a difference. Now, I've got no doubt that over a period of time, we'll start to build a really strong kind of storybook, if you like, of where we've been able to look at that joint working across the system. Some work, for instance, is already being done around drug and alcohol use and the impact of drug and alcohol use on children. So we will start to see some of that cross-generation work being able to be evidenced a bit more clearly. I can't hand on heart give you an example straight away, but the system that we've set up will enable that to happen.
Thank you.
Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Chair. It's just going back to Ivan's point regarding the sharing of information on missing children or absconding children, and just wondered if the same process was available for vulnerable and missing adults.
Okay, good question, thank you. By coincidence, one of the things that the National Adult Safeguarding Chairs asked me to do was to engage in a piece of work by the charity Missing People, who were advocating for a document that is called a Missing Framework for Adults. That's gone through a few iterations over the last few months, and indeed the 6 safeguarding adult boards that operate across the Northumbria police footprint had themselves already started to produce a framework for adults missing from health and care settings. I referenced the fact that obviously I was a police officer before. Not all adults who go missing are at risk and are vulnerable. And so actually, for there to be local value, my personal view, based on a bit of professional experience, is to focus on those who are vulnerable and those who go missing from care settings. So that is the framework that we're bringing into Shropshire. Again, please don't think that means that we've not been doing anything about missing adults for a long period of time. The police absolutely have. As I've said, Phil Shakespeare and the police have sent across the data set to me today. Importantly, and back to role of elected members, there will be 3 elements to the missing adults framework that you could absolutely engage with and promote for us. One is called the Ella Protocol. One is called the Herbert Protocol, which you may well have heard of, and one is called the Winnie Protocol. In effect, what they are is they are processes to put in place some advanced thinking and to collect some advanced information for people who have mental health needs or have learning disability or who have dementia, and it is likely that they might go missing. And the importance of those protocols is that information is gathered in advance of the person going missing. Some preventative actions can be put in place by the different settings, and if they do go missing, the police and other agencies haven't got to spend time gathering that information to go looking for the person. It's already there for them. So a really good question, thanks. It will be landing in Shropshire very soon, and those three elements, you would be really welcome if you could support us promote the profile of those across our communities and our health and care settings.
And just adding to that, we're building that information into we've already built it into our COVID data set, but it will be going into our business as usual core data sets as well. And Ivan referred to a meeting we were both involved in yesterday about missing, and we are about to launch a piece of task and finish work about this particular issue, and it will be an all-age approach, and that will feed into our exploitation group. So although we've got these strategic priorities, there ends up being quite a few spin-offs sometimes, and there's lots of work going underneath those to actually inform the bigger piece of work.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, and again, if I could just one other bit on that. This is about granularity, but I think it's important. The police missing system compact, in certain circumstances, generates an automatic text message to people. So people who have gone missing are at risk. It sends them a text message to say, please get in touch. We are concerned for your safety. We would like to support you. For a group of people who go missing and are felt to be at risk of suicide, they get what is called a suicide text safe. And what happens is they get the same message, but they also are told they will receive a telephone call in a few moments' time from the Samaritans, and that actually happens. The last little bit of the equation that we were exploring yesterday and we're going to take forward, at the moment, there is no mechanism for once that person is found safe and well, and thankfully most often they are, there isn't a mechanism for working with that person to inform their GP, for their GP to pick up and see if there are any particular health needs they could pick up on. So again, a bit of detail about the granularity of the kinds of things that we do in support of these particular processes that exist.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, Elliot.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, if I can pose a question more focused on Shropshire Council and our officers. We've spoken quite a bit today about processes, and I know in our pre-meeting we spoke about bureaucracy, we spoke about intelligence and freeing up our officers to work as effectively as they can. So my question really is based on the digital transformation programme that we've incurred a lot of costs for over the throughout this administration, and liquid logic that we are implementing. I know in the past in this group that we've spoken about the digital transformation and how that can support the council, and I know that we've also spoken about potential problems. So the question I have really with the management of information and the huge amount of information I'm sure that you as a department deal with is how effective is digital transformation in supporting you, and is there further work to be done with that, with support of the social workers and all of our officers?
So, Chair, would you like me to pick the response to that one? Okay, so just in terms of liquid logic, has been implemented and implemented fully now. Interestingly, we're just getting the results of our first social work health check post implementation, and it's starting to embed. The feedback that we're getting from social workers is that it's a much better system, it's far more intuitive, it's much easier to use. So whilst there is still some functionality whenever you implement a new system, there's still work to be done to do on it. But actually we're really pleased with the way that it's working at the moment, and we haven't had any major sort of fallouts from that transfer to that system. So I think that's really good. In terms of the wider digital transformation programme, I think quite honestly we couldn't be doing this if we hadn't have put all of those processes and systems into place. You'll recall very early on in early March, before we went into lockdown, we experimented. We literally sent everybody home for one day, the night before, 4 o'clock. We said, tomorrow you will be working at home. We don't want anybody in any offices, please. So we wanted to test the system, and Sarah's smiling and nodding. So, you know, that's what we did, and actually it worked really well. And you know, we've continued to work really well with a high level of functionality that actually our partners and our colleagues and other local authorities have looked on with jealous eyes, actually. So I think, you know, that investment that we made you know, over the past sort of 3 years, over the past 10 months has really paid off. We could not have carried on doing what we've done, and actually Shropshire is being seen on nationally actually as an example of good practice about how we've used our IT, about how we've continued to deliver the majority of our services. We've continued to deliver everything that we haven't been told to close, if you like, and I can assure you that hasn't been the case for every local authority area. So from our perspective, yes, it has paid off.
And just to add to Karen's point from an adult's perspective, because in my previous role, I worked in adult social care and was very involved in the implementation of Liquid Logic, particularly when we were developing the safeguarding side of that system. And we get, again, mirroring what Karen said, positive feedback. It's not perfect, not everybody's going to be happy with it. It doesn't suit everybody working electronically, but I've no doubt that actually some of the processes have been streamlined as a result of the work streams that have been built into Liquid Logic. One of our biggest challenges is making sure that we can get all of the information out of the system that we know that we want to be able to get out. So you know, that will always be a work in progress, I guess, but I think it's been very positive for the staff.
Yeah.
Thank you both. What an encouraging good news story.
Definitely. Who'd have thought we'd have been doing this 10 months ago? Especially me, as Karen knows. I think I can spot Councillor Lee, do you want Christian?
Yes, I noticed that Karen said that the social workers have welcomed the new IT system. Is there an avenue for social workers to feedback as to what improvements they think could be made to the system to make it even more effective in their daily use?
Yeah, just to confirm, we have those systems in place. We do have a user group, so that all feeds back on a regular basis, and a result of that we have of course made some amendments along the way.
Thank you.
Okay, I can't see any more questions. No. Can I thank Sarah and Ivan very much for being so positive about what's happening, and I have to say, not wading through that big annual report, this has been much better. Good. And I look forward to down the line when you come back to report to us again. But thank you both very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, we have some recommendations that the People Overview Committee note and accept the content of the report and identify key lines of inquiry to enable further scrutiny of our strategic safeguarding arrangements. So, do I need to take a vote on that? So, on my list is Councillor Allcroft.
For.
Councillor Horton.
For.
Christian Lee.
For.
Matt Lee is not here. I don't think. Did Matt Lee come into the conversation? No. Councillor Lynch.
For.
Celia's not here. Councillor Pardee.
For.
And did Carol Morgan come into the conversation? No. I think we take that as unanimous. And thank everybody for their questions. Hang on. I think, is it my update now?
Yes, it is, Chair.
Sorry, I was at the wrong piece of paper. Can I ask the Director of Children's Services, for an update on working with the schools during the COVID pandemic, please.
You can, Chair, if I could find my unmute button. I think we probably reported at the last meeting, so I can give a general overview, but during the time of the pandemic lockdown period, so the last 10 months or so, we've had very regular dialogues with our schools. We have kept them updated in terms of what the government expectations are, and working with them in terms of what are their issues and their problems, and then been feeding that back when we have weekly meetings. In fact, they have been daily for a large part of that time with the DfE. So we know some of the issues that schools have had are around additional costs and funding, for example, and we've been feeding that back to the DfE, and hopefully have got some shift as a result of that, but we're probably passing on the same messages as every other local authority anyway. Members may be aware that there was a communication yesterday from the department to suggest that whilst there's been lots of debate about when schools should close for Christmas, whether they should close a week early and have an extra period of a break from from attending school, that's always been fought very strongly by the DfE. And I guess the government, but yesterday there was an announcement to say that schools can close on Monday Friday the 18th of December. So that communication has gone out to schools. It is down to schools to determine what's best for them. Our understanding at the moment is that most schools will remain open on the 18th and not to make it a PD day. Largely because of the late notice and impact on working families, but also it's quite short notice to plan in an extra PD day, with about 8 working days. Some will close, so we'll have a mixed picture across Shropshire in respect of that 18th of December. In respect of attendance, throughout the period, attendance has been good, and that has continued throughout. Current attendance is round about 92%, which again is positive, better than the national average, both in primary and secondary. All schools, all secondary schools, I should say, have had a case or more of COVID that's impacted on their school. Very few have closed completely for a period of time, but we have had some schools that have done that. More schools have sent home bubbles of children. So every secondary school has been affected, and round about 57% of our primary schools have had a case. And again, they've been sending bubbles home, with a few schools closed for a short period of time. As it stands at the moment, I think we've just got the one primary school that is closed. The number of cases in schools is generally falling. We'll continue to monitor that very closely. And where schools have had cases reported, they've had support from both my team in terms of learning and skills, and also our public health team. In respect of schools themselves, they are likely to, and those of you who are governors will recognise this, schools are of course seeing increased costs, not least of all around additional staffing, additional cleaning, additional heating. Many schools are reporting they're opening their windows more to get the airflow through, and of course that creates extra heating costs. I have to say that schools have done an absolutely fantastic job over the past 10 months or so, and school staff are now feeling quite fatigued by it all. So I think they'll look forward to a well-deserved rest in a week or so's time. Heads are expected to be available through the early Christmas period up till December the 24th for track and trace purposes. So schools and head teachers particularly will have a role to play should any cases come up, or any connected cases. Members will also be aware that Ofsted have continued to not to take graded inspections in schools. They have been doing assurance visits, so going into schools and assuring themselves that things have been kept going forward and children have been kept safe, and we've had a number of those in Shropshire, but they haven't been graded, and we don't expect any graded inspections in any schools to take place until after the Easter break now. Chair, I'm very happy to answer any further questions. Has Peggy frozen? Yeah.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Karen. That's
okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, that's okay. We had a question this morning. Social workers.
Sorry, sorry, Peggy.
You.
Yeah, I just didn't hear any of that. Was it just me?
No, I didn't hear it either.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, bad signal, Peggy.
Oh, sorry. It's the recruit. Sorry. Oh.
Now, put it in the chat, Peggy, and I can respond.
Oh. Daniel, can you do that?
Yes, I can, Chair. I'll do that for you. In fact, I think I know what you were about to ask anyway. Would you like me to sort of ask that for you?
The recruitment and retention, yeah.
That's right. Yes, it was the members had a question. They wanted an update at some point. It didn't necessarily have to be right now, of course, on the recruitment and retention of social workers this year. I know we looked at this last year.
So I'm very happy to bring that forward. I can't give you a precise picture today, but I'm very happy for that to be agendaed again. We have still got some reliance on agency workers, but it's not as acute as it has been in the past.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Thank you, Karen. The other update was, can you hear me still?
No, we can hear you now.
Yes. Yeah. I've been attending the joint HOSC meetings following the Ofsted inspection relating to mental health issues. It's been very interesting. I've learned an awful lot. Getting things quite right with CCG, but they've had all the officers there relevant, and I think they've made the issue that, you know, we would like things to improve pretty quickly, and hopefully we'll
Oh dear, that's quite some freeze.
Yeah. I think, was Peggy going to say hopefully we'll see some improvement?
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully. Well, I mean, Peggy, you know, I think we would all be there, wouldn't we? Yeah. But I think that the fact that you know, there is a good deal of focus on that particular piece of work now can only be a good thing, really.
Yes, indeed. Because
Yeah.
I know members have been concerned about it, so, but hopefully it's moving forward now.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I think item 8 is the future work programme.
Can I just ask a question, Chair?
Yeah, sure.
Karen spoke about some schools in Shropshire closing earlier for Christmas. Now that the Shropshire Council have declared that they'll be ensuring that children have meals through the Christmas break, will that include those that finish early?
The school meals cover the 2 weeks period of Christmas. So if schools have chosen to close early, then it will continue to be the school's responsibility to ensure that they get the school meals. The majority of schools, the announcement that was made by the government yesterday relates to one day, which is Friday the 18th.
Thank you.
Okay. No, can't see any more. Don't think. Nobody else have any questions? Future work programme. Daniel, would you like to present this?
Thank you very much. Daniel Webb here, Overview and Scrutiny Officer. As the elections draw ever closer, so the work programme shortens. We're only working up until a meeting in March on this. I've met with officers earlier this week to begin work on a report for you on transitioning to adulthood. I met with officers from Children's Services and Adult Services, and we drafted out a scope of that, which I've also which I'll be working on this week for the officers to populate that report so we can get that over to you. There's also a piece of work underway to bring some reporting back to you, an update on housing support for looked after children, and Laura Fisher will be attending at that meeting on the 27th. We've also I've also met with officers to cover two pieces of work in March, one on drug and alcohol services for young people and one on short breaks for respite care. There's also another item on the agenda that looks at community safety partnership and exploitation, which I think is a legacy from earlier work programmes. And so I think at the moment what I would ask is whether or not you're happy with the items in January and March, whether or not you feel that you actually need an item on community safety partnership given the meeting today, and then finally whether there are any other items that you might wish to raise at those two meetings. I noticed that Elliot has already asked around social work and recruitment, and I've made a note of that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody got any comments they'd like to make?
I'd be interested in the part that the voluntary sector play with supporting young people leaving care and perhaps transitioning into their own accommodation. What support they're given, you know, and do reviews take place every so often to see how they're getting on?
I think you're right that we don't need to review the safeguarding board again. Safety partnership, we've already done that, haven't we?
Yes.
Okay, shall I remove that for the March meeting then?
I think so.
Okay.
So nobody's indicated.
Yes, please, Chair. Oh, she's gone.
Kevin, I would suggest you go ahead and ask your question.
I just thank you.
Or make your point.
I would like us to have some sort of a discussion about child poverty in the county, please.
Yeah. Daniel, can you pick that up in terms of the work programme?
Yes, I can, Karen. What I will do is I'll meet with you separately, as I think sort of connections are a bit iffy today, and just try and get a bit more information about what you want out of that meeting, and then I'll meet with some officers and try and scope that out for you. So I'll arrange something with you next week, if that's okay, Karen.
Yes, thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, so the date of the next meeting is Wednesday, the 27th of January. Yeah?
That's correct.
Yeah. The next part says exclusion of press and public. I actually don't think we need to do this because the minutes are not available at this time.
Yes, that's right, Chair. They'll go to the next meeting.
Yeah.
So this is the conclusion of the agenda.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hope you all enjoyed the meeting, and
Chair?
Merry Christmas to you all.
Chair?
Yes, Kevin?
I'm sorry to interrupt again, but I attended a meeting yesterday of licensing, and I've attended this meeting today, and I've noticed that we have a number of people absent, and I was wondering whether you could speak with the executive, the admin of the council, because it's happening too often now. I've heard it's happening in other areas, and it has to be down to the fact that we're at home. We started off really well, but it seems to be dropping off. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but it's something I've noticed.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I'll take that up with somebody. Okay, well, what I was going to say was have a Merry Christmas, all of you, because I don't think I'll be seeing you probably before. Enjoy what you can.
You too, and everybody else. Thank you, Peggy.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah,
Bye now.
thank you.
Merry Christmas, everybody. Goodbye.